We didn't save her. Victor Hale set down his coffee cup, looked straight ahead. His voice was so quiet you had to lean in to hear it. We just reminded her she was worth saving. That one sentence, that one night, that one question nobody else in her life had ever been brave enough to ask. A young woman, a bar kitchen, tears she had learned to swallow before anyone could see them. A biker boss who noticed what everyone else chose to ignore. This is that story. If this is your first time here, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. Silver Creek Roadhouse had been sitting beside that stretch of Arizona highway for so long that the locals had stopped seeing it. It was just there. The way a telephone pole is just there. The way a fire hydrant is just there. You drive past it so many times it becomes invisible, part of the landscape, something your brain stops bothering to register because it never changes and never surprises you. That was exactly what most people thought about Emily Carter, too. She was 25 years old, blonde hair always pulled back tight. The same pale yellow waitress uniform every single day, cleaned so carefully that even the worn patches looked deliberate. She moved through the bar the way water moves around a stone, quietly, efficiently, always finding the path of least resistance. She knew where every regular sat before they sat down. She knew who wanted their coffee black, who needed 3 sugars, who was going to order the same brisket plate they always ordered, even though they always complained it was too spicy. She knew the Roadhouse the way you only know a place when you've spent years there with nowhere else to go. To the customers, Emily Carter was just the girl who brought the coffee and cleared the tables. To Roger Delaney, her manager, she was a reliable employee who never complained, never called in sick, never asked for a raise, and most importantly, never said no to a double shift. To her coworkers, she was quiet, polite, a little distant, kind of person you'd describe as sweet because you didn't know anything real about her. Everyone who walked through the door of the Silver Creek Roadhouse, Emily Carter was invisible, comfortable, safe, invisible, and that was exactly the way she needed it to be. The thing about fear is that it doesn't always look like fear from the outside. Sometimes fear looks like a perfect smile. Sometimes it looks like a spotless uniform and a coffee pot that's never empty and a laugh that comes exactly when it's supposed to. Sometimes fear looks so much like competence that the people around you mistake it for strength. Emily had learned this early. She had learned to be so good at her job that nobody looked too closely. She had learned that if you kept moving, kept filling cups, kept smiling at the right moments, people saw what they expected to see and looked no further. She had become an expert at existing in plain sight without being seen. There were cracks, small ones, the kind that only appear if you're paying attention, and most people aren't. The way she'd go completely still when the bell above the front door rang unexpectedly. Not a slight pause, a full freeze, like a deer hearing something in the brush that hasn't revealed itself yet. A half-second of total, rigid stillness before she caught herself and moved again. If you blinked, you missed it, and most people blinked. The way her eyes always found the exits first in a room. Always. You'd watch her come through the kitchen door, and before she looked at the customers, before she looked at anything else, gaze swept to the back exit, the front door, the side window that hadn't locked properly in 3 years. She knew the distances. She had calculated them. The way her hands moved when Roger's footsteps came close. He could be walking to the register, walking to answer the phone, walking to yell at someone in the kitchen about the fryer temperature. It didn't matter. When she heard that particular heavy tread coming her way, her hands would drop to her sides, flat against her thighs, fingers pressed down hard, like she was bracing, like she was preparing for impact. These were things that were there to see if anyone was looking. Most people weren't looking. The Hells Angels arrived every Friday night around 9, not a massive group. 12, sometimes 15 riders. They came in loud. They came in leather, pad, and the first time they showed up at the Roadhouse, Roger had seriously considered calling somebody. Told that story sometimes, laughing at himself, because within 20 minutes, they had tipped better than his Friday lunch crowd combined and hadn't broken a single thing. They became regulars. Victor Hale always came in last. He was 45 years old, and he carried those years in a particular way Not like weight, but like gravity. He had simply accumulated enough experience that the world bent slightly toward him when he entered a room. Broad through the shoulders. His hair had gone mostly silver. Arms, from his wrists to where his sleeves ended, were covered in ink that told a story 20 years in the making. He didn't walk into rooms so much as he arrived in them. When Victor Hale arrived, the room adjusted. The conversations got a little quieter, not because people were afraid, exactly, because there was something about the man that commanded a certain kind of stillness. The stillness you feel when someone enters who actually knows what they're doing, a surgeon walking into an operating room, a pilot stepping onto a plane. The quiet that comes from recognizing competence you can't fully explain. He always sat at the far end of the counter. He always ordered black coffee. He always said please and thank you. And from his first Friday at the Silver Creek Roadhouse, Victor Hale watched Emily Carter the way nobody else bothered to. He noticed the freeze at the doorbell the second Friday, thought maybe he'd imagined it, so he watched the third Friday. He hadn't imagined it. He noticed the exit mapping the fourth Friday. He'd done the same thing himself for 15 years, so he recognized it for what it was: not paranoia, not anxiety, but training. Specific, deliberate habit of someone who is needed to know where the doors are. Notice the hands the fifth Friday, the way they dropped when Roger came close, the way they pressed flat, the way she'd seemed to hold her breath for just a moment, just until Roger passed, and then something in her shoulders would release almost imperceptibly. Victor Hale had spent a lifetime reading rooms and reading people, and Emily Carter was the most carefully constructed illusion he had ever encountered. She had built a version of herself so perfectly unremarkable that she had made herself disappear. You can't disappear from someone who's actually looking. He never said anything to her. He didn't push. He didn't stare. He didn't do anything that would have made her more afraid. Just watched, the way you watch weather when you're not sure yet what it's going to do. He waited because Victor Hale had learned that the most important moments in life are the ones you cannot rush. He ordered his coffee. He said please and thank you. He tipped 30% and never asked for anything she didn't offer. Every Friday night, he sat at the end of the counter and he saw her. The night everything changed was a Thursday, not a Friday, not when the chapter was there in numbers. Thursday, the last week of November, when Arizona gets cold enough to remind you it can. The highway outside was quiet. The roadhouse was nearly empty by 9 o'clock. Victor had driven out alone. He did that sometimes, took the long highway at night when he needed to think, and the roadhouse was a natural stopping point. He wasn't expecting it to be anything other than what it usually was. Parked outside, came through the door, let the warmth hit him, walked to the end of the counter. Emily was there. She brought the coffee without being asked. Cold night, she said, standard small talk. The kind she'd perfected to keep conversation comfortable and brief. Getting there, he said. She went back to wiping down the far end of the counter. Roger's truck was in the lot, so he was somewhere on the premises. Two guys Victor didn't recognize were in a booth near the window, finishing what looked like their second round of beers. A waitress named Pam was doing end-of-night side work near the register, rolling silverware. By 9:30, the two guys had paid and left. By 9:45, Pam had clocked out. By 10, Roger came out from the back, took his keys off the hook behind the register, told Emily to lock up, and walked out the front door. Victor noted all of it, not intentionally. Just the way some people note things automatically, the way your eyes adjust to light. He was finishing his second cup when he heard it. He set the cup down and he listened, because the first time he heard it, he thought he might have been wrong. He wasn't wrong. It was coming from the kitchen. Behind the closed door with the small porthole window and the push bar and the hand-lettered sign that said employees only. Sound, quiet, controlled, the specific practice quiet of someone who has learned to cry without making noise. Not the sounds of shock or grief or anger. Something older than all of those. Something that had been happening so long it had found its own rhythm. Efficient, almost silent. The kind of crying that comes from someone who has understood, in their bones, that no one is going to come. Victor sat very still. In his life, he had heard a lot of things that required action. He had heard threats. He had heard violence. He had heard lies designed to look like truth. and truth nobody wanted to hear. He had heard a lot of things, and he'd learned to calibrate his response. But there was something about that sound, that small, contained, almost invisible sound that hit him somewhere behind his sternum and stayed there. Stood up slowly. He walked toward the kitchen door. Through the small porthole window, he could see her. Emily stood at the far sink, her back partly turned, one hand gripping the edge of the counter. She was not shaking. She was not doubled over. She was standing completely upright, the way you stand when you're trying to look like nothing is happening, as if the posture itself might retroactively make the tears untrue. With her free hand, she reached for a shelf above the sink, her sleeve pulled back. Victor's jaw tightened. He'd seen bruises before, seen them from fights and falls and accidents and everything in between. He knew what a bruise from a fight looked like. He knew what a bruise from a fall looked like. He knew what a bruise from a grip looked like. The mark on Emily Carter's forearm was the specific shape and place of 4 fingers pressed into skin with more force than anyone should ever use on another person. Dark. It was not new. It was not the only one. At the edge of the sleeve, just barely visible, was the shadow of something older, something that had had time to begin yellowing at the edges. This was not an accident. This was not once. Victor pushed the door open slowly. Emily spun around. The fear that crossed her face in that moment, immediate, total, and physical, was something Victor would think about for a long time afterward. Not the kind of fear that comes from being startled. The kind that comes from the body already knowing what usually happens next when someone comes through a door unexpectedly. She moved back. Not far. Just enough. The automatic calibration of someone who has learned to put distance between themselves and anyone who appears suddenly. "The bar's closed," she said. Her voice was completely level. Absolutely no indication that 2 seconds ago she had been crying. She had turned it off like a switch, which told Victor more than the tears had. Victor stopped just inside the doorway. He kept both hands visible down at his sides, did not move further into the room. "I know," he said. He kept his voice low, not gentle in a way that might seem false, just low, even. The voice you use when you are trying very hard not to cause more damage. "I'm not here to scare you, Emily." She didn't say anything, but he saw the way she was calculating where he was, where the door was, what was between them. Recognized the calculation because he'd taught it to people himself. He stayed exactly where he was. "I heard you," he said. Just that, no accusation in it, no demand. Emily said nothing. Her expression didn't change. She was very good at that, at keeping her face from changing. "You don't have to tell me anything," he continued. "I'm not asking you to. But I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to hear it as the only thing it is, which is someone actually wanting to know the answer." He paused. The kitchen was completely quiet, Emily. His voice was steady. "Who hurt you?" The silence that followed lasted a long time. Emily Carter stood at the other end of that kitchen and stared at Victor Hale. For a moment she looked like a person standing at the edge of something very high, looking down, trying to decide whether the drop would kill her or save her. She opened her mouth, closed it again, looked away. "Don't know what you're talking about," she said. Victor didn't argue. He didn't push. He didn't say he'd seen the bruise or describe what he'd heard through the door. Just nodded slowly, the way you nod when you're telling someone you heard them, not when you're telling them you agree. "Okay," he said. He stayed where he was. 30 seconds passed. Emily picked up a dish towel, set it down again, picked it up again. Her hands needed something to do, that much was obvious, and the dish towel was the closest option. "It's not," she started, stopped. Victor waited. "People always think it's..." She stopped again, pressed her lips together, tried a different angle. "There's nothing to tell. I bumped it." "Okay," Victor said again. Same tone, same face. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in all the Fridays he'd been coming into this bar. She'd been careful never to really look at anyone, and especially not at him, because he had always felt to her like someone who might actually see back. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "Because you haven't asked me to leave." Something moved across her face. Something complicated. Came and went so fast you might have missed it. But Victor caught it. Been watching her face for 6 weeks, and he caught it. That was not the answer she was expecting. In Emily Carter's experience, when men stayed in rooms, it was for their reasons. She had never once had someone stay in a room for her reasons. She looked back down at the dish towel. I've been doing this a long time, she said quietly. The putting a good face on it. Most people don't even notice. I know, Victor said. Most people don't want to notice. I know that too. Emily was quiet. Then why did you? Victor considered the question seriously. Not the casual toss-off of someone who has a ready answer, but the genuine consideration of someone who wants to give an honest one. My sister, he said finally. When I was 19, didn't notice. I had every reason to notice and I didn't. And then I did. And by then he stopped. I notice now, everywhere, all the time. Because it's too late to go back and notice then. Emily stood completely still, the dish towel hung from her hand, forgotten. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice had changed. Something in it had gone quieter and truer. So am I, Victor said. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a truck went by on the highway, headlights sweeping briefly through the window above the sink. Name is Daniel, Emily said. She wasn't looking at Victor when she said it. She was looking at the dish towel, or maybe past it, at some middle distance where she'd been storing this for so long she'd almost forgotten it was there. Daniel Brooks. A pause. He's my fiancé. Victor didn't move. He's a businessman, she continued. He's very well liked. Everyone thinks she made a sound that might have been a laugh in a different context. Very charming. He's one of those people who everyone likes. Kind of person where if you said something, people would think you were confused, or lying, or dramatic. Victor said nothing. I've tried to say something, not to authorities, but to people friends, when I still had them. Coworker Lisa, before she got transferred, I tried, she stopped. Did not believe me. It was more like they believed the version of Daniel. They knew more than they believed me. She set the dish towel on the counter. He controls the money, she said. Don't have a bank account he doesn't know about. Don't have a credit card he doesn't know about. He monitors my phone. He knows where I am, a pause, a small involuntary shift of weight. He knows where I am pretty much always. Victor's hands were still at his sides, but the muscles in his forearms had gone tight. Tried to leave, Emily said. Her voice was very flat now, the way a voice goes flat when it's reporting facts, because the emotion attached to them has been used up. 3 times, the first time I got 40 miles. He found me at a gas station. He wasn't angry. That time that was almost worse. He was very calm. He said we were going to go home and talk about it. She looked up. The second time I got almost to Phoenix. I was going to stay with my college roommate. Called her before I got there. I don't know what he said to her, but she called me and told me she thought I should go back. She thought I was her words having some kind of episode. She said the words without bitterness. That was the thing that hit hardest, the complete absence of bitterness in her voice. She'd moved past bitterness a long time ago. She was somewhere on the other side of it, in a place that didn't have a name yet. Third time, I didn't even make it out of the county, she said. Told someone where I was going, I thought I could trust them. I couldn't. Victor exhaled slowly through his nose. Emily, he said. She looked at him. How long? She understood the question. 4 years, she said. The kitchen clock ticked. I was 21 when we met, she said. He was everything. He was the kind of person who makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. And then gradually, and I want to be very clear, because everyone always wants to know how you let it happen, it's never fast. It's never obvious. It's so gradual that by the time you realize what's happening, you're so deep inside it that you can't see the edges anymore. She sat down on the metal step stool near the prep counter. Just sat down, like her legs had decided the conversation required a different posture. I used to be a different person, she said. Friends, I had plans. I was going to go to culinary school. I love cooking. That's actually something real. The food here, that's something I actually love. And I had this whole plan for what I was going to do. She stopped. I had a life in my head. I knew exactly what it looked like. What did it look like? She glanced up, surprised by the question. She'd expected him to redirect, to focus on Daniel, to get back to the practical matter. The question was so simple and so unexpected that it caught her off guard. My own restaurant, she said. Small, really small. Kind of place with 12 tables and a handwritten menu that changes based on what's good at the market that week. I had the name picked out and everything. A pause. I had a notebook, floor plans, menu ideas. I used to draw them out when I was bored in class. She looked down. Daniel found the notebook in my second year with him. Thought it was funny. He kept calling it my little hobby. After a while, she shook her head. I stopped drawing. Victor stood at the kitchen door for a long moment. Then he crossed the room slowly, telegraphing every step, and pulled out the metal stool across from her and sat down. Tell me about the restaurant, he said. Emily stared at him. What? The restaurant, the 12 tables. Tell me about it. She stared at him for so long, he thought maybe she wasn't going to answer. Then something happened to her face. The careful, constructed blankness she had worn for so long cracked, not dramatically, not in a way that made noise, but the way ice cracks in spring, slow and inevitable and quiet, and underneath it was something that looked like the person she had been describing. The one with the notebook, the one with the floor plans. The menu would change every week, she said slowly, based on what was seasonal. I hate restaurant menus that are the same forever. You know? Like nothing in the world changes, nothing in the kitchen reflects where we are in the year. I wanted the menu to feel like it was alive. Go on, Victor said. Emily Carter talked about her for the next 20 minutes, and it was the most Victor Hale had ever heard her say in all the Fridays combined. And her voice kept changing as she talked, getting less flat and more real, the way a room gets warmer as more people enter it. And by the time she caught herself suddenly aware of how long she'd been talking, suddenly aware of where she was and who she was talking to, there were no more tears. She looked at Victor. Why did you do that? She asked. Because you're a person, he said, not a situation. Sometimes people need to remember what they're made of before they can deal with what they're in the middle of. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, my father used to say something like that. Victor waited. Emily looked at her hands. He died 6 years ago. He was the kind of man who would stop on the highway if he saw someone who needed help. No matter who it was, no matter what it looked like, he always said that's what people are for, to be there for each other. She paused. This is strange, he stopped once on the I-40 to help someone who'd had a motorcycle accident. I was with him. I was about 16. The guy was badly hurt. My dad stayed with him until the ambulance came, helped him on the roadside. He never told anyone about it. That's just what he did. Victor's expression had changed, barely, but Emily, who had become very good at reading faces, caught it. What? She said. Nothing, Victor said, but his voice had shifted slightly. You know something, Emily said, about what I just said. Victor looked at her for a long moment. What was your father's name? Emily blinked at the non-sequitur. Robert Carter. Why? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I-40 westbound. Mile marker 211, 2005. Emily went still. I was the one on the road, Victor said. Kitchen clock ticked. Emily stared at him. That was you, she said. Wasn't a question. I had a blowout at 80 miles an hour, Victor said. I went off the road. I was conscious, but I couldn't move my right leg. I was there for about 20 minutes before your father stopped. A pause. Talked to me the whole time. Kept me from doing something stupid. Kept me still. I wanted to try to get up, and he talked me out of it every time. Paramedics said later that if I'd gotten up, I would have made the spinal injury significantly worse. Victor paused. Never got his name. He was gone before I came back from surgery. Emily put her hand over her mouth. She sat there with her hand over her mouth and her eyes filling for entirely different reasons than they had been earlier. He never told us that story, she said finally. Her voice was very small. Told me there was a man on the road. She never stopped. He made it sound like it was nothing. That's how he was. He always made it sound like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing, Victor said. I know, he saved my life. Genuinely, that's not an expression. Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked exhausted and awake, the same time the way people look when something large and old has been shifted in them. So, she said finally, what do we do? The word we, the fact that she had said we, that she had in some wordless and exhausted way decided to extend that toward him was the most important thing that had happened in that kitchen since Victor had come through the door. Victor leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, voice low and steady and very direct. First, he said, you're not going to handle this alone anymore. That part is over. He paused. Second, and I need you to hear me on this carefully, we are going to do this right. No cowboy operation, no threats, No intimidation, no anything that puts you in more danger or gives him any kind of weapon to use against you. We are going to do this right, which means smart, slow, absolutely airtight. Emily was watching him carefully. I have people, he said. People who know how to handle situations like this. Legal people. Investigators, people who know what evidence looks like and how to get it and how to make sure it sticks. This is not going to be. He paused, choosing the word carefully. This is not going to be frontier justice. This is going to be real, documented, legal. The kind of thing he come back from. Because you have done everything right and he has done everything wrong, and there is a paper trail to prove it. Emily was quiet for a long time. He's going to know, she said, if I start gathering evidence. If I start, he watches everything, Victor. He notices everything, I know, Victor said, which is why we don't rush it, which is why we plan, which is why the first thing we do before any of that is find you somewhere safe that he doesn't know about. He paused. Does he know you work here? Yes. Does he know which nights? Yes. He has my schedule. Does he ever come in? Twice. But he didn't like it. He doesn't like. She paused. He doesn't like that people here are friendly to me. He doesn't like places where people might notice things. Victor nodded slowly. Something in his expression said he understood that more specifically than she expected. Doesn't come in on Friday nights, Emily said. When your group is here, I know. Victor said, I noticed. Simple fact that he had noticed the pattern, had noted the absence, had been paying attention to something she had been living with for so long landed on Emily Carter like something she had not felt in 4 years. Like someone was actually genuinely paying attention. Scared, she said. Not ashamed of it, just stating it. Good, Victor said. That means you're thinking clearly. Scared people make careful decisions. You don't want to not be scared. You want the fear to work for you, not against you. Emily looked at him. My dad would have liked you, she said. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know I would have liked him. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, another vehicle passed on the highway. Inside, in that small and ordinary kitchen that smelled of dish soap and the ghost of tonight's dinner service, something had happened that was quiet and enormous at the same time. Something that would not be visible to anyone who hadn't been in the room. Something that had no ceremony to it and no announcement. Emily Carter had stopped being alone in this. She didn't know yet what that would cost her, or what it would require of her, or how long the road out of where she was would turn out to be. But for the first time in 4 years, when she looked at what was ahead, she was not looking at it alone. Victor stood up from the step stool. I'm going to give you a number, he said. Not mine directly, a woman named Carol. She knows what she's doing, and she's completely discreet. Anything happens, anything at all, any change, any escalation, you call that number. Anytime, day or night. Emily nodded. He wrote the number on the back of a bar receipt, looked at it for a moment before handing it over. You can trust this, he said. Emily took the receipt. She held it carefully, the way you hold something small that has unexpectedly become important. Why are you doing this, she asked. Genuine question, not rhetorical. Victor picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on the prep counter. Because your father sat on the side of the I-40 for an hour and a half and talked to a stranger until the ambulance came, never told anyone about it, went home, and didn't think twice about it, he said, because that's what people are supposed to be for each other. He paused at the kitchen door, and because nobody should have to cry alone in a kitchen and think there's no one coming. Looked at her once more. Lock up safely, he said. Then he was gone. Emily stood in the kitchen. The dish towel was still on the counter. Clock was still ticking. The highway outside was still doing what highways do at 10 o'clock at night. Everything looked exactly the same. But she held a bar receipt in her hand with a phone number on it. She pressed it flat against her palm. She thought about her father. She thought about a notebook she had thrown away years ago, full of floor plans for 12 tables and a handwritten menu that changed with the seasons. For the first time in a very long time, she let herself think, maybe, just maybe. She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, though that was still there, a constant companion by now, as familiar as her own heartbeat. She didn't sleep because something else was keeping her awake, something that felt dangerous and fragile and necessary, felt like hope. And hope, after 4 years of learning not to hope, was the most terrifying thing she had felt in a long time. She held the bar receipt in her hand until morning. She called the number 3 days later, not because something new had happened, not because Daniel had done anything different. She called because she woke up at 4 in the morning on a Sunday with her heart slamming against her ribs and the bar receipt still on the nightstand where she'd put it. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the apartment that didn't feel like hers because nothing in it was chosen by her. Nothing in it reflected who she was. Every piece of furniture and every picture on the wall selected by Daniel with the specific confidence of a man who had long ago decided his taste was the only relevant taste, and she thought, if I don't call now, I won't call at all. I'll talk myself out of it. I've talked myself out of everything else. So she picked up the phone, went to the bathroom, turned on the faucet so the sound of running water would cover her voice, the way she'd learned to do years ago when she needed to cry without Daniel hearing through the door. Dialed the number, it rang twice. This is Carol. Voice was calm. Not the artificial calm of someone doing a job. The real calm of someone who has heard a lot and is no longer surprised by the weight of what people carry. Emily sat on the edge of the bathtub. Victor gave me this number, she said. I know, Carol said. I've been expecting your call. Something about that, the simple fact of being expected, of having been thought about by someone while she was alone, cracked something open in Emily's chest. Don't know where to start, Emily said. Start anywhere, Carol said. We'll sort out the order later. So Emily talked. For 47 minutes, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the faucet running, she talked. She told Carol things she had never said out loud in sequence before, not the individual incidents which she had cataloged in her own mind 1,000 times, but the whole shape of it, the arc, the way it had started and the way it had built, and the way each thing had enabled the next thing until she was so deep inside it she couldn't see where it had begun. Carol listened. She asked questions precise, non-judgmental, the questions of someone who needed specific information rather than someone's satisfying curiosity. When did the financial control start? Was Emily's name on any accounts? Who had witnessed incidents? Were there medical records from any injuries? Emily answered everything. By the end, she felt hollowed out and somehow lighter at the same time. Like she'd been carrying something so long, she'd stopped feeling its weight until someone helped her set it down. Emily, Carol said, I want you to understand something clearly. What you have described to me is not a difficult relationship. It's not a complicated situation. It is abuse. Financial, psychological, and physical. It is a crime. Emily sat with that word, crime. She had never let herself use that word. She had always found softer words. Difficult, complicated, troubled. Okay, she said, the other thing I want you to understand, the Carol continued, is that you have more than you think you do. You have time at work where he has limited access to you. You have a community around you that, from what Victor has told me, is more invested in your safety than you currently know. You have yourself, which matters more than anything else. Because you made this call, and that is not a small thing. Felt small, Emily said. It always does, Carol said. Right up until you look back at it from the other side. They made a plan. Not a final plan, nothing that moved fast, nothing that required Emily to do anything immediately visible. The first phase was documentation. Carol walked her through it carefully. What to keep. How to keep it in a way Daniel wouldn't find. The specific kinds of records that mattered legally. Carol had to contact a woman named Joanna Park, a family law attorney who worked with domestic abuse cases, and Carol was going to make an introduction. Before they hung up, Carol said one more thing. Victor wanted me to tell you something. Emily waited. He said she already knows how to be brave. She's been doing it every day for 4 years. She just hasn't had anyone point it out. Emily pressed her lips together. Tell him she stopped. Tell him thank you. She hung up the phone, turned off the faucet, sat in the silence of the bathroom for a long moment, listening for any sound from the bedroom. Nothing. Daniel was still asleep. She looked at herself in the mirror. The face she'd learned to make, the neutral face, the unremarkable face, the face that gave nothing away. For the first time in a very long time, she let herself see something else in it. She put the phone back in her pocket and went to make coffee. She moved through the kitchen the way she always did, quiet and careful and practiced. She did not look like someone who had just changed the direction of her life. That was the point. The next Friday, when the Hells Angels came in, Victor sat at his usual place at the end of the counter. Emily brought the coffee without being asked, the way she always did. She set the cup down. She said, without looking at him, "I called." Victor nodded, just once, didn't make it a thing. "Good," he said. She moved back down the counter. That was all. That was everything. But Roger was watching from the other end of the bar. He'd been watching since the previous Thursday. He wasn't sure what he'd seen, wasn't sure he'd seen anything, really, but there was something in the way Victor Hale's eyes tracked Emily Carter across the room that Roger Delaney did not like. Not for any good reason. Not for any reason he could have articulated if pressed. Roger was not a man who articulated things well. He was a man who felt threatened easily and responded to that feeling with the specific aggression of someone who had never once been held accountable for it. He watched and he made a call. Not to Daniel, not directly, not yet. Just to a mutual acquaintance. A man named Pete Stoller who knew everybody and owed everybody and was the kind of person who functioned as the connective tissue of a certain type of social world. Roger mentioned in passing that Emily seemed to have gotten friendly with some of the regulars. Left it at that. Just information. He didn't think about it again after that. He should have, because Pete Stoller owed Daniel Brooks a favor. Pete Stoller paid his debts. By Saturday afternoon, Daniel Brooks knew that Emily had been seen having what witnesses described as a private conversation with Victor Hale after closing on Thursday night. Daniel sat with that information for a long time. He did not react immediately. That was one of the things Emily had tried to explain to people, and one of the things they consistently failed to understand. Daniel Brooks did not lose control. He never lost control. Everything Daniel did was deliberate, measured, and considered, which was what made it so effective, what made it so hard to explain to people who expected visible anger, raised voices, dramatic scenes. Daniel didn't do dramatic scenes. Daniel did quiet calculations followed by quiet consequences. He waited until Sunday morning. Emily was cooking breakfast. She heard him come into the kitchen, and she tracked his position by sound the way she always did. The specific sound of his footsteps, the particular weight and rhythm of them, told her more than most people would believe. These footsteps were deliberate, even, too even. She kept her face on the eggs she was scrambling. "You stayed late Thursday," he said. Not a question. Statement with the architecture of a question. "I had to lock up," she said. Roger left early. He opened the refrigerator, got out the orange juice, poured a glass. "Anyone else there when you were locking up?" Her hands were steady on the pan. She had rehearsed this, not this exact conversation, but conversations like it. Carol had said, "He will probe before he accuses. Give him true information that contains nothing useful." A couple of guys finishing their drinks, she said. "They left before I locked the front." "How about the regulars, the motorcycle group? Were they there Thursday?" "They usually only come Fridays," she said. All of this was true. Victor had been there alone. The chapter had come Friday. She was not lying. She was being very, very careful about the shape of the truth. Daniel said nothing. He drank his orange juice. She plated the eggs and set them on the table and sat down across from him and met his eyes and made her face do the thing it had learned to do, open, mild, slightly tired, the face of someone with nothing to hide, specifically because they hadn't thought to hide it. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "These look great," he said, looking at the eggs. She smiled back. Under the table, her left hand was pressed flat against her thigh. She had passed the first test. She didn't know yet that Daniel already knew more than he'd revealed. That was his method: gather information, reveal nothing. Head, let the other person think they've gotten away with something, and then use the gap between what they think you know and what you actually know to devastating effect at a time of his choosing. She found out 2 weeks later. She had met with Joanna Park, the attorney Carol had connected her with, at a coffee shop 45 minutes from home on a Tuesday when Daniel thought she was working a lunch shift. The meeting had lasted 2 hours. Joanna was brisk and precise and made Emily feel, for the first time, like what was happening to her had a legal language and a legal remedy and a process that could actually work. They talked about evidence. They talked about what a restraining order would require. They talked about the financial documentation Carol had been helping Emily collect on her days at work. Emily drove home feeling something she recognized with alarm as confidence. She should have noticed the car parked 2 spaces down from the coffee shop. The one that was still there when she arrived and still there when she left. The make and model that she would have recognized if she'd been looking for it. She wasn't looking for it. She was thinking about exit strategies and legal timelines and the list of things Joanna had told her to gather. She got home at 3:15. Daniel's car was in the driveway, which it shouldn't have been. He had told her he had meetings until 5. She sat in her car for 10 seconds. Then she got out, walked to the front door, opened it. Daniel was sitting in the living room with his jacket still on, like he'd just gotten there. He was holding his phone and looking at the screen. Looked up when she came in. "How was the lunch shift?" he asked. "Busy," she said. "I'm tired." She started toward the bedroom. "Emily." She stopped. "Who is Joanna Park?" The question dropped into the room like something heavy falling from a height. Emily turned around. Her face did not change. She had 3 seconds to decide something, and she used all 3 of them. "Customer," she said. "She comes in sometimes on Tuesdays." Daniel looked at his phone. "She's a family law attorney," he said, "specializing in domestic situations." He said the last 2 words with a particular neutrality that was worse than any tone he could have used. Emily said nothing. "I'm going to ask you this once," Daniel said. Voice was completely level, "and I'm going to need you to think very carefully before you answer, because how you answer, this is going to determine a lot of things." Set the phone face down on the cushion beside him. "Talking to people about us." The room was absolutely still. Emily looked at Daniel, at the careful, controlled face, the eyes that were doing their particular calculation, measuring distance, measuring her, measuring what move came next. She thought about Carol's voice on the phone. "We'll sort out the order later." She thought about Victor in the kitchen. Scared people make careful decisions. She thought about Joanna Park's voice. "Document everything, because documentation is protection." And then Emily Carter did something she had never done before in 4 years of this. She held his gaze and she didn't flinch. "Joanna Park sat at table 7 2 Tuesdays ago," she said. "She ordered the soup and a coffee. She told me she liked the food and asked if we catered events. Told her I'd look into it. I gave her my personal number so she could follow up. That's all." She paused. "Is that what you wanted to know?" Silence stretched. Daniel's expression did not change. He was very good at not letting his expression change. But Emily, who had spent 4 years studying his face the way a scientist studies an unpredictable element, saw something shift behind his eyes. Recalibration. He was reassessing. He wasn't sure. She had given him a story that was just plausible enough. "You've been different," he said finally. "I've been tired," she said. "The holiday shifts are brutal. You know that." "Not tired," he said. "Different." She let a small amount of frustration into her expression. Controlled, calibrated. The specific frustration of someone who doesn't understand what they're being accused of. "Daniel, I don't know what you want me to say. I worked a double on Thursday. I'm running doubles all this week. I'm exhausted. That reads as different. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do about that." Another long silence. Then Daniel stood up, straightened his jacket. "I'm going to make a call," he said. "Don't start dinner without me." He walked past her and went into the study and closed the door. Emily stood in the living room. Her heart was going at about twice its normal speed. She went to the kitchen, stood at the sink, turned on the cold water and let it run over her wrists, which was something she did when she needed to slow her system down. The cold water on the pulse points, the focus it required. She counted to 20. Then she picked up her phone, pretended to look at something, and typed a single text to a number she had saved under a fake name in her contacts. The text said, "He knows I met someone. Doesn't know who or why." I held it. Need to move faster. She deleted the text. 30 seconds later, a reply came. "Understood. Carol is calling Joanna tonight. Don't change anything visible." "You did right." She deleted that too. Daniel came out of the study 20 minutes later, and he was normal. That was always the most disorienting part, how normal he could be after those moments. They had dinner. He talked about work. He asked about her week in the routine way, the surface way, the way that was about performing normalcy, rather than actually wanting to know. She answered the same way. After dinner, he watched television and she did the dishes, and it was indistinguishable from any other Sunday night in the apartment, except that Emily's hands moving through the dishwater were not shaking. They had been shaking. For years, they had been shaking. Through dinners and conversations and tests and close calls, her hands had shaken, and she'd hidden it. Tonight they were still. She noticed this, and she thought something has changed. Not outside, inside. Something that no one watching her could see, and Daniel couldn't measure, and that existed in a place he had never managed to reach. She was not fixed. She was not safe. She was not out. She was not alone anymore. And it turned out that was the exact thing she'd needed most. Joanna Park meeting had produced two critical outcomes. The first was a legal strategy that Joanna believed had a real chance, not a guarantee, but a genuine, evidence-based chance of getting Emily out with legal protection, financial recovery, and a restraining order that would hold. Second was a referral to a private investigator named Marcus Webb, who specialized in financial forensics, which was Joanna's way of saying finding money that people like Daniel hide, because Daniel had hidden money. Emily hadn't known the full scope of it until Marcus spent 2 weeks looking and reported back to Carol, who called Emily on a Thursday during her work break. He has accounts Emily doesn't know about, Carol said. At least 3 that Marcus has identified and the money going into them. A pause. Emily, some of what he's been doing constitutes fraud, not just controlling your money. Actual financial crimes. Emily sat in the back room of the Roadhouse on her 10-minute break and processed this. How much, she said. Marcus is still working on the full picture, but it's significant. What does that mean for getting out? It means, Carol said carefully, that when this comes to light, and it will come to light, Daniel Brooks is not going to be in a position to chase you. He's going to be in a position of defending himself on multiple fronts simultaneously. Emily stared at the water-stained ceiling of the back room. He's going to know it was me, she said. When this comes out, he's going to know. Yes, Carol said, which is why before any of this goes anywhere official, we need you somewhere he can't reach you. I have nowhere to go. You do, Carol said. Victor has arranged something. He wants to talk to you this Friday. Friday night, Victor came in with the chapter. The bar was loud and full, and nobody was watching 2 people have a quiet conversation at the end of the counter over coffee. There's a place, Victor said. A woman named Ruth. She's not connected to anything here, different city, 2 hours out. She's housed women before. It's completely off the books. Daniel can't find it because there's nothing to find. Can't just disappear, Emily said. If I disappear, he'll file something. He'll make me look. Joanna has handled that, Victor said. You won't be disappearing. You'll be going on a work trip. You'll have texts, a paper trail. It'll hold for long enough. Emily was quiet. How long have you been planning this, she asked. Had. Since the Thursday night you told me about the restaurant, he said. She looked at him. You decided that fast? The decision was easy, he said. Planning takes time. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. What if it doesn't work, she said. It might not work the first time, Victor said. Things rarely do. But it will work eventually, because you have 3 things Daniel doesn't. What 3 things, he said. Time and the truth. Emily looked down at her coffee. He has more resources than any of this, she said. He has money. He has connections. He has secrets. Victor said, people with secrets are not as strong as they look, because everything they do is in service of keeping the secret. It's a lot of energy going in the wrong direction. He picked up his cup. The people standing behind you have nothing to hide. That's a different thing entirely. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, when? 2 weeks. Victor said, maybe 3. Joanna needs a little more from Marcus. Carol needs to talk to Ruth. You need to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Nothing different, nothing visible. Can I do it, she asked. Not fishing for reassurance. Genuine question. 2 or 3 more weeks of this. Victor looked at her directly. You've done 4 years, he said. You can do 3 weeks. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too close to something else, but was the closest thing to a real laugh she'd produced in longer than she could remember. Okay, she said. She moved back down the bar, refilled someone's glass, smiled at a joke she didn't hear, moved through the room the way she always moved through the room. Visible, unremarkable. The perfect performance. But underneath it, visible to everyone in that bar, Except the man at the end of the counter who had started watching 6 weeks ago and hadn't stopped. Something had been quietly, irrevocably set in motion. Countdown had started, and Daniel Brooks, in the apartment he had selected and furnished and controlled, had absolutely no idea. 3 weeks Victor had promised turned into 10 days, not because the plan accelerated, because Daniel did something nobody had anticipated, and it forced everyone's hand. Started on a Wednesday morning, 8 days, after the Friday night conversation at the counter. Emily was getting ready for her shift when Daniel came into the bathroom. Without knocking, he never knocked, hadn't knocked in years. The removal of that small privacy had been so gradual, she couldn't remember when it stopped, and he stood in the doorway and said, with the specific lightness that meant the opposite of light, "I'm going to need you to quit the Roadhouse." Emily was brushing her hair. She kept brushing it. "What?" she said. "The Roadhouse. I think it's time. Been there long enough. And Roger called me last week, did you know that? He called me directly. Said he was concerned about some of the people you'd been spending time with." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "I think a change would be good for you." Her hand kept moving. Stroke, stroke, stroke. "Roger called you," she said. Her voice was completely even. "Last week." Yes. She did the math without showing she was doing it. Roger had called Daniel. That meant Daniel had known for a week longer than she thought. Everything he'd said at dinner, every normal evening since it had all been performance. He'd known and he'd waited, and he'd let her think she was safe. "I like my job," she said. "I know you do," Daniel said pleasantly. "But I think you need a break. You've been tired. You said so yourself. We can manage on my income for a while. Take some time for yourself. Take some time for yourself." Remove the one place she had that he didn't fully control. Remove her access to the only community that knew what was happening. Remove her income, the last small thread of financial independence she had left. She set the brush down. "Can we talk about this tonight?" she said. "I'm going to be late, of course," Daniel said. "Tonight." He moved out of the doorway. She heard him go to the kitchen. She stood at the bathroom counter and looked at herself in the mirror, and she thought, 10 days is now 0 days. Tonight he closes the last door. She picked up her phone and typed a text to the contact saved under the fake name. It said, "He's moving tonight. I need out today." She pressed send. She deleted it. She finished getting ready and went to the kitchen and had coffee with Daniel and talked about nothing important and smiled at the right moments and drove to work. She didn't know if anyone would answer in time. Carol answered in 11 minutes. The reply came while Emily was in the Roadhouse parking lot, still sitting in her car, hands on the steering wheel, watching the front door like it might give her information. The text said, "Victor knows. Come to work like normal. Do not go home tonight. We will have everything ready by your end of shift. Park in the lot next door at shift end. Blue pickup. You know the driver." She read it twice, deleted it, got out of the car. She walked through the Roadhouse door and smiled at the cook and tied her apron and started her shift. She took orders and poured coffee and cleared plates and laughed at the right moments, and nobody in that building, not Roger, who watched her with new interest from behind the register, not the regulars, not the couple in the corner booth having the kind of fight that would have made Emily flinch. 6 weeks ago, nobody saw anything different in her. She was extraordinary at this. She knew that now. The thing that had been survival was also, it turned out, a skill. 7 in the evening, Roger called her into the back. "I need to talk to you," he said. Emily followed him into the storage room. She already knew what was coming. She saw it in the way he didn't quite meet her eyes, in the specific posture of a man who was doing something he'd been asked to do by someone whose approval he wanted more than he valued basic decency. "I'm going to have to let you go," Roger said, "business reasons. Tonight's shift." He had called Daniel. Daniel had called him back. Now Roger was doing Daniel's work for him, standing in his own storage room, firing the girl he'd been content to exploit for years, doing it as a favor to a man who was about to lock her in. Emily looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. Roger blinked. He'd expected something else. Crying, maybe. Pleading. The particular performance of powerlessness he was comfortable with. "I'll finish my shift," she said. She turned around and went back to the floor. Roger stood in the storage room alone for a moment, vaguely unsettled, and then went back to the register. Emily moved through the rest of her shift with a kind of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Every table she served completely. Every cup she filled with full attention. Was not numbness. It was the opposite of numbness. It was the feeling of someone who has made a decision and is living entirely inside the present moment, because the present moment is all there is. 9:45, she untied her apron. She collected her tips. She said goodbye to the cook, whose name was Alberto, and who had worked beside her in that kitchen for 3 years, and who she had never had a real conversation with because real conversations were dangerous. She thought about saying something. She didn't. She just said, "See you around, Alberto." Alberto said, "Buenas noches, Emily." She walked out the back door with her bag over her shoulder. She did not go to her car. She went to the lot next door. The blue pickup was there. The driver was a man she recognized from the chapter early 50s, quiet, with a gray beard, and the specific, unhurried calm of someone who has driven a lot of people out of a lot of difficult situations. Name was Frank, and Victor trusted him completely, and that was all Emily needed to know. She got in the truck. Frank didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't make conversation. He pulled out of the lot and onto the highway and handed her, without looking, a burner phone and a small paper bag. "Carol's number is already in it," he said. "Victor's too. Your phone, the one Daniel knows about, stays off. Battery out if you can." Emily took her phone out of her bag, powered it off, removed the battery with the practiced efficiency of someone who had watched videos on exactly how to do this and had rehearsed it in the bathroom 3 times. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Ruth's place," Frank said. 2 hours out. Carol already talked to her tonight. She's ready. Does Victor know about Daniel moving up the timeline? "Victor made 3 calls the minute your text came in," Frank said. "He knows. Joanna knows. Marcus knows." Emily absorbed this. "Daniel is going to go home tonight, and I won't be there," she said. "Yes, he's going." She stopped. "You don't know Daniel. When he doesn't get what he expects." "Carol has a contact at the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office," Frank said. "Daniel makes any kind of formal report tonight, it's being monitored. He shows up anywhere near where you are, which he can't because he doesn't know where Ruth's place is. There are people who will know before he gets within 10 miles. Emily stared at the highway ahead. "I've been trying to get out for 4 years, she said. Frank nodded. "I know. The other times I tried alone. Thought I could do it alone." "Most people do," Frank said. "It's not a character flaw. It's what he taught you to think." She looked out the window. The highway moved under them. She thought about the apartment. The furniture Daniel had picked. Pictures on the wall. The bathroom where she'd learned to run the faucet. She didn't feel sad about leaving it. That was the thing she noticed. She had expected to feel something complicated about leaving, the way you feel complicated about things that have been your life, even when your life has been terrible. But there was nothing complicated. She just felt the highway under her, and the seat beneath her, and the small warm weight of the burner phone in her hand. "My notebook," she said suddenly. Frank glanced at her. "I had a notebook. Floor plan plans, menu plans. Daniel found it, and after that I stopped." She paused. "I don't know why I thought about that." "Because you're going somewhere, you can start a new one," Frank said simply. She looked at him. He was watching the road. She thought, Victor picks good people. She didn't say anything else for a long time. Frank didn't push, and the highway moved underneath them. Arizona went dark and enormous on either side. Emily Carter rode in a blue pickup truck away from 4 years of a life that had been built around her like a very careful prison. And she felt she cataloged this carefully. Because it surprised her, she felt awake. More awake than she had felt in years, like some long and heavy fog had begun to lift, and the air coming in was cold and unfamiliar, and entirely, completely real. Ruth's house was warm, and the guest room had a quilt on the bed, and Ruth herself was a woman in her late 60s who opened the door and didn't ask any questions and simply said, "You hungry?" When Emily said yes, sat her down at a kitchen table, and made her scrambled eggs at midnight and talked about her garden and the terrible quality of television these days, did not mention anything that had happened or why Emily was there, and somehow that was exactly the right thing. Emily ate the eggs and thought about her own eggs. The ones she'd made for Daniel on Sunday morning. The way her hands had been pressed flat under the table. She ate every bite. "Bathroom's at the end of the hall," Ruth said, collecting the plate. "Sleep as long as you need." There's no schedule here. Emily stood in the doorway of the guest room for a moment. Thank you, she said. Ruth waved a hand like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. Emily knew that better than most people. She lay down on the bed and she looked at the ceiling and she thought, Daniel is home by now. Daniel is standing in the apartment and I am not there. And he is understanding slowly that this is not a delay. He is understanding that something has changed that he did not plan for and did not control. She held that thought, and then she let it go, because she was not in the apartment. She was here. Here, for the first time in 4 years, the doors were for her to open and close, and the faucet did not need to run to cover the sound of her. There was no footstep in the hall that her body needed to brace for. She closed her eyes. She slept. Not light, anxious, half-awake sleep. Real sleep, deep and still and long. She slept 9 hours. Daniel, as it turned out, did not go home immediately. Daniel went to the Roadhouse. He arrived at 10:15, 40 minutes after Emily had left. Roger was still doing end-of-night inventory. The exchange between them lasted less than 5 minutes, and what Roger saw on Daniel Brooks's face during those 5 minutes was the thing he told people about later. In the specific way people describe witnessing something they wished they hadn't. Not rage, not the visible, recognizable heat of someone losing their temper. Something colder and more deliberate than that. The face of someone recalculating with complete control. She leave with anyone? Daniel asked. I didn't see her leave, Roger said. Her car, still in the lot. Daniel walked out to the parking lot and stood beside Emily's car for a long moment. Tried her phone. It went to nothing, not voicemail, nothing. He tried again, same result. He stood beside her car in the parking lot for 3 full minutes. Then he took out his own phone and made a call. Not to the police, not yet, to his attorney. Voice, when his attorney answered, was the voice of a man asking for information, not a man who had lost something. Distinction was important to him. He was already managing the narrative, already building the version of events he would need. The thing about Daniel Brooks's particular kind of power was that it had always depended on Emily being isolated, on her having no one, on the story he'd constructed around her, too emotional, too unstable, impossible to reason with being the only story available. And now, for the first time, there were other people who knew another story entirely. 3 days after Emily left, Marcus Webb sent his completed report to Joanna Park. Joanna read it twice. Then she called Carol. It's worse than we thought, she said. Better than we hoped. Explain that. Worse because the financial crimes are extensive. He's been siphoning from business accounts for years. There are shell companies. There are clients who have been defrauded. This is not a domestic situation with a financial component. This is a criminal situation with a domestic component, and the criminal side is substantial. A pause. Better because it means we have leverage that has nothing to do with Emily's testimony alone. She is not the only victim here. The moment this goes to the appropriate authorities, and it will, Daniel Brooks is not going to have the bandwidth to chase her. He's going to be running from his own fire. Carol was quiet for a moment. Who takes this to the authorities? I have a contact at the FBI field office in Phoenix, Joanna said. Financial crimes. I've worked with him before. He will take this seriously. Another pause. Emily needs to know before it moves, Carol said. Agreed. Can you get to her? I'll call Victor. Victor drove out to Ruth's house himself. He didn't call ahead. He pulled up on Saturday afternoon, knocked on Ruth's door, and when Emily came to the hallway and saw him standing in the doorway, she looked the way people look when they've been holding their breath for a very long time and have just been given permission to exhale. Sit down, he said. I have things to tell you. They sat at Ruth's kitchen table. Ruth went to the garden without being asked. Victor told her everything. The Marcus Webb report, the shell companies, the FBI contact, the scope of what Daniel had been doing that existed entirely outside of what he'd done to Emily. Emily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He's going to say I was part of it, she said. When this comes out, he'll say I knew. He'll try to make me part of it. He can try, Victor said. Joanna has already thought about that. Financial forensics show clearly who controlled the accounts and who didn't. You have no access, no signature authority, no connection to any of it. He tries to pull you in, the records will pull him back out. Emily looked at her hands on the table. He's done this to other people, she said slowly. Fraud. There are other victims, yes. People who don't know yet. Some of them, yes. She absorbed this. He was doing it the whole time, she said. The whole 4 years. I was living with someone who was committing federal crimes, and I had no idea. No, Victor said firmly. You were living with someone who was very deliberately making sure you had no idea about anything he didn't want you to know. That's not the same thing as not knowing. That's the result of being controlled. She looked up at him. When does it move? She asked. Joanna is meeting with the FBI contact Monday, he said. After that, it's out of our hands and in the system. Could be fast or it could take time. But once it's in, it's in. Emily nodded. What do I do? You stay here, Victor said. You stay safe. You talk to Joanna when she needs you. He paused. You start thinking about what comes next. What comes next, she repeated. Your life, he said. The one after this. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Ruth could be heard moving around in the garden, the particular sound of someone comfortable in their own space, unhurried and grounded. I've been afraid for so long, Emily said, that I don't actually know what I'm like when I'm not afraid. Victor nodded. That's normal, he said. What if... She stopped. What if I'm not the person I think I am? The one with the restaurant and the 12 tables and the seasonal menu. What if I made that up because I needed something to hold on to and it's not actually real? Victor looked at her for a long moment. You know what you made when you got here 3 nights ago? He said. She frowned slightly. Ruth told me, he said. She said you woke up Friday morning and asked if you could use her kitchen. Said she sees eaten at restaurants that couldn't produce what you made her for breakfast. Emily blinked. She said that? Word for word, Victor said. Said she's still thinking about the eggs. Something happened to Emily's face. Something quiet and complicated and entirely genuine. Not quite a smile. Something that existed just before a smile, in the place where a person is deciding whether they're allowed to feel what they're feeling. They were good eggs, she said. They were apparently exceptional eggs, Victor said. That was when Emily Carter, for the first time in 4 years, actually laughed. A real one, small and a little rusty, and surprised out of her by the specific absurdity of discussing eggs in the middle of the most serious week of her life. Real, the kind of laugh that lives in the body and not just on the face. Victor let it be what it was. He didn't say anything else for a moment, just let her have the laugh, let it run its course. Then she wiped her eyes, the good kind this time, the kind she hadn't used these muscles for in longer than she could remember, and she looked at him. Monday, she said. Joanna meets with the FBI Monday. Monday, Victor confirmed. And then it's in the system. Then it's in the system. Emily pressed her palms flat on Ruth's kitchen table, not bracing, grounding. The difference, she was only now learning, was enormous. Okay, she said. The word was small. The thing behind it was not. Sighed. Ruth moved through the garden in the afternoon light, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. Somewhere 2 hours away, Daniel Brooks was making calls and managing narratives and building his defense, completely unaware that by Monday afternoon, the ground he was standing on was going to become a very different thing. Emily sat at Ruth's table and thought about 12 tables and a handwritten menu and seasonal ingredients from a Saturday market. She thought about a notebook she didn't have anymore. She thought, I can buy a new one. The simplicity of that thought, I can buy a new one, was so enormous and so obvious and so long overdue that she sat with it for a long time, turning it over, feeling the weight of it, specific weight of something that is very small and means everything. She could buy a new one. She could start again. And this time, nobody was going to find the notebook. Monday came the way important days always do, without ceremony, without any signal, that this particular morning was different from any other morning. Emily woke at Ruth's house to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds. For a half second, the way it happens when you've slept deeply, and honestly, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. And the remembering felt, the first time, like relief instead of dread. She got up, made breakfast without being asked. Ruth sat at the kitchen table and watched with the particular quiet approval of someone who understands that some people show gratitude through their hands. You slept, Ruth said. 9 hours again, Emily said. Good. Ruth wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Your body's paying off a debt. Emily thought about that while she cooked. 4 years of partial sleep, 4 years of the specific half-wakefulness, of someone whose nervous system never fully powered down because it couldn't afford to. Body taking the hours now that it had been denied. She felt it a heaviness that was not depression, but recovery, the deep cellular fatigue of someone beginning to come back from something. 9:15, Joanna Park walked into the FBI field office in Phoenix and sat across from a man named Special Agent Carl Reeves, and she placed Marcus Webb's report on the table between them. Reeves read the executive summary in silence. He turned 3 pages. He looked up. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Based on the forensics, at least 6 years," Joanna said. "Possibly longer. The shell company structure suggests planning that predates the earliest records Marcus could access." Reeves turned another page. "The domestic situation," he said. "The woman, Emily Carter. She is currently in a safe location. She is willing to cooperate fully. She has documentation of the financial control he maintained over her, which is directly linked to the fraud structure. Because the same mechanisms he used to conceal the shell companies from business partners, he used to conceal her own financial situation from her." Joanna paused. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of the concealment infrastructure, not knowingly, but structurally. He kept her financially dependent and informationally isolated, which served both purposes simultaneously. Reeves sat back. "That's not accidental," he said. "No," Joanna said, "it is not." He looked at the report for another long moment. "I'm going to need to make some calls," he said. "This crosses into wire fraud, mail fraud, potentially RICO, depending on how far the shell structure goes. This isn't a single agent matter." "I understand," Joanna said. "How long?" "Give me 48 hours, Reeves said. "Don't let your client go anywhere. And don't let anyone tip this." "Understood," Joanna said. She gathered her copy of the report and stood up. "The door," Reeves said. "Miss Park." She turned. "The woman," he said. "She's safe where she is?" "Yes." "Keep her there," he said. Joanna drove back to her office and called Carol from the car. Carol called Victor. Victor was in his garage when the call came. He listened without interrupting while Carol relayed what Joanna had told her. Then he was quiet for a moment. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours before they move. Could be longer depending on what Reeves finds when he starts pulling threads. Daniel's going to feel it before they move, Victor said. Men like him, they have sensors. When things start shifting in their direction, they feel it. Joanna's aware of that. Reeves is aware of that. They want to move before he has time to do anything with what he's feeling. Victor stood in the garage and thought for a moment. "Is Emily all right?" "Ruth says she cooked breakfast this morning." Something in Victor's expression shifted. "Then she's all right," he said. He was correct, and he was also about to be tested on that assessment. 41 hours after Joanna walked out of the FBI field office, Daniel Brooks did something none of them had fully anticipated. He showed up at the Roadhouse. Not looking for Emily, he understood by now that Emily was not going to be found at the Roadhouse. He showed up looking for Victor. He came in on a Tuesday night, which was not a night the chapter came in, which meant he had done enough research to know that Tuesday nights were the nights Victor sometimes came alone. Sat at the counter, not at Victor's usual spot, but one seat away from it, and he ordered coffee, and he waited. Victor came in at 8:15. He saw Daniel immediately. Not because he knew what Daniel looked like, he'd never met the man, but because in 25 years of walking into rooms and reading them, Victor Hale had developed the specific ability to identify a person who is waiting for him. There's a posture to it, a particular quality of attention directed at the door. Victor walked to the counter. He sat down at his usual spot. He ordered coffee from the new girl, Emily's replacement, 2 days in, already overwhelmed, and he waited for it, and he said nothing. Daniel spoke first. "Mr. Hale," he said. Victor looked at him. Said nothing. "I think you know who I am," Daniel said. "I know who you are," Victor said. The coffee arrived. Victor picked it up, drank, set it down. "I'd like to talk to you about Emily," Daniel said. "All right," Victor said. Daniel had prepared for resistance, for hostility, for the posturing he associated with men who looked like Victor. The simple "all right" disarmed him slightly. Victor saw it, the micro-adjustment behind Daniel's eyes, the recalibration. "She's made some choices recently that I'm concerned about," Daniel said. "I think she's been influenced by people who don't fully understand her situation. She has a history of she struggles sometimes, emotionally, trying to get her help for years, but she resists it. When she gets into a certain state, she can be, he paused. She's not always reliable in terms of what she says, stories she tells. Victor looked at him steadily. She's not well, Daniel continued. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I love her. I'm genuinely concerned. And I think whoever she's been talking to has probably heard some things that are... Mr. Brooks, Victor said. Daniel stopped. I'm going to say one thing to you, Victor said. Voice was completely level. No heat in it, no threat. Just the specific, grounded directness of a man who is done with preamble. I'm going to need you to hear it clearly. Daniel waited. Whatever you came here to do, Victor said, it's too late for it. Silence that followed had a particular texture to it. Daniel's face did not change, but something behind it did. Same recalibration. Emily had described the internal machinery, adjusting, assessing, computing. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel said carefully. Yes, you are, Victor said. He picked up his coffee again, finished it, set the cup down. Go home, Mr. Brooks, he said. He stood up, left money on the counter, and walked out of the roadhouse without looking back. Daniel sat at the counter for a long time after that. Drove home. He sat in his car in the apartment parking lot for 20 minutes. Then he went inside and he called his attorney, and he said in a voice that was controlled and careful and gave almost nothing away, I think we need to accelerate the asset protection strategy we discussed. The attorney, who was a careful man, said, Daniel, what's happened? Nothing specific, Daniel said. Precautionary. Daniel. His attorney's voice changed slightly. There's something I need to know.
Precautionary, Daniel said again.
He hung up, and then he sat in the apartment with the furniture he had chosen, and the pictures he had hung, and every small object exactly where he had placed it. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Brooks felt the specific discomfort of a situation he did not control. He didn't sleep well that night. He was right to be worried. 6:42 the following morning, 3 vehicles pulled into the parking lot of Daniel Brooks's office building. The men who got out of those vehicles wore jackets with letters on the back, and they carried documents that had been signed by a federal judge at 11 o'clock the previous evening, did not knock when they entered the building because the documents said they didn't have to. Daniel was not at the office. He was at the apartment. The team at the apartment arrived 4 minutes after the team at the office. Daniel opened the door in a bathrobe. He looked at the badge and the documents and the 3 people standing in the hallway, and his face did the thing that Emily had spent 4 years watching it, do the controlled recalibration. The internal machinery adjusting, performance of a man who is surprised when he is not surprised. I'd like to call my attorney, he said. You can do that, Special Agent Carl Reeves said. We'll wait. Daniel made the call. His attorney arrived 40 minutes later. By that time, the agents had been through most of what they came for, and what they found in those 40 minutes substantially exceeded what Marcus Webb had identified in the financial forensics. There were documents in a home safe that suggested the shell company structure went back not 6 years but 9. There were communications on a personal device that Reeves flagged for the digital forensics team with a particular expression of someone who has found more than they needed and is already thinking about how it changes the scope of the case. Daniel sat in his living room, his curated, controlled, perfect living room with his attorney beside him, and federal agents moving through his space. He looked like what he was for the first time in a very long time, a man whose structure has just been removed from beneath him. Carol called Emily at 8:47. Emily was in Ruth's kitchen, halfway through making something complicated with sweet potatoes that she'd been planning for 3 days. She set down the spoon when her phone rang. It's happening, Carol said. Right now, this morning. Emily gripped the phone. He's at the apartment. Reeves is there personally. It's moving, Emily. She sat down on one of Ruth's kitchen chairs. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, more steady than she expected. Joanna is going to call you in an hour. She needs you to be available and focused. Can you do that? Yes. You doing all right? Emily looked at the half-made sweet potato dish on the counter. Smell of it in the kitchen. The specific calm of Ruth's house around her. I think so, she said. Victor wanted me to tell you something, Carol said. Emily waited. He said, today is the day the weight starts going the other direction. She pressed her lips together. Tell him. She stopped. Tell him he was right about the 3 weeks. Carol almost laughed. I'll tell him. Joanna called at 9:51. She was brisk and precise and moving fast, the way she moved when things were in motion, and there was no time for anything that wasn't essential. Here's where we are, Joanna said. Federal agents executed search warrants at both his office and the apartment this morning. Based on what Reeves told me 20 minutes ago, what they found exceeds the scope of Marcus's report. They are treating this as a significant financial crime investigation with multiple victims. Emily is listed as a cooperating witness, not a subject. Distinction is on record and will stay on record. What does he get charged with? Emily asked. That's still developing. Wire fraud is certain. The interstate element makes it federal. Depending on what the digital forensics show, there may be additional counts. Reeves also mentioned that two of Daniel's business partners, and both have confirmed they had no knowledge of the shell company structure, which eliminates the possibility of him distributing responsibility. Emily absorbed this. The restraining order, she said. I'm filing this afternoon, Joanna said. Given the circumstances, the judge will move on it today. By tonight, there will be a legal document preventing him from contacting you, approaching you, or attempting to locate you. It will be enforced. He'll fight it. He will have a great deal to fight in the coming weeks, Joanna said. You will be a very low priority for him very shortly, Emily. That's not an accident. That's the design. Emily sat with the phone pressed to her ear and thought about the design. Carol and Marcus and Joanna and Frank in the blue pickup and Ruth with her midnight eggs and Victor in the kitchen, asking a question that nobody else had thought to ask. Design. Built by people who had decided she was worth the building. Joanna, she said, yes. He told me for 4 years that no one would believe me, that his version was the only version anyone would accept. Emily, Joanna said, right now there are federal agents going through his records. There are two of his business partners on the phone with investigators voluntarily telling them everything they know. There are financial forensics that tell a story so clearly documented that his version of events has no room to exist. A pause. Version is over. Emily closed her eyes. She opened them. Okay, she said. I'll call you when the restraining order is filed, Joanna said. Stay where you are. Stay reachable. She hung up. Emily sat in Ruth's kitchen for a long time. The sweet potato dish was still on the counter, half finished, the ingredients arranged in the particular organized way. She always arranged things when she was working mise en place, everything in its place, cook's instinct for order in the midst of complexity. She stood up, picked up the spoon, went back to work. Ruth came in from wherever she'd been and stopped in the doorway. You cooking, she said. I'm cooking, Emily said. Something happened. Something happened, Emily confirmed. Ruth moved to the coffee maker. Good something or bad something? Ruth asked. Emily thought about federal agents and restraining orders and 4 years of a design dismantling itself in real time. She thought about Daniel's face, the morning he'd told her to quit the roadhouse, the lightness that meant the opposite of light. She thought about that face meeting Reeves this morning in the apartment doorway. She thought about the recalibration that had no calculation left to make. Good something, she said. Good, Ruth said. Whatever you're making smells exceptional. It needs 20 more minutes, Emily said. I'll set the table, Ruth said. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy accommodation of two people who have gotten used to sharing a space. Emily cooked. The smell of it filled the house. Outside, the world was doing what it was doing. Federal agents and attorneys and investigators and the long, grinding machinery of consequence finally catching up to someone who had believed for years it never would. Victor heard from Reeves directly at 2 in the afternoon. Not officially. Reeves was not in the habit of calling civilians with case updates. But Reeves had done his homework on Victor Hale in the 48 hours since Joanna's visit, and what he'd found was not what he expected. The call he made was the call of a man who wanted to acknowledge the role of people who would never appear in any official record. You built this, Reeves said. Not us. We're just the part that has subpoena power. Emily built it, Victor said. We just held the tools. Either way, Reeves said, it's solid. The financial piece alone takes him out. Domestic documentation and the pattern of coercive control, the kind of case that doesn't fall apart on cross-examination. Plead, Victor said. Probably, Reeves said. Men like him always think they can negotiate. Sometimes they're right. In this case, a pause. The second business partner we talked to this morning, turns out he's been suspicious for 2 years and he has his own documentation. We didn't even know about it. It just walked in. Victor said nothing for a moment. The woman, Reeves said, "She going to be all right?" "She's going to be more than all right," Victor said. "Good," Reeves said. "That matters." "It's the only that matters," Victor said. Reeves paused. Then, "I've been doing this for 19 years. Financial crimes, white-collar, complex fraud. You want to know the thing that always gets me? The thing I can never fully get used to." Victor waited. "It's never just money," Reeves said. "There's always a person somewhere in it. Someone they used as part of the structure. Someone who lived inside the fraud without knowing, whose life was arranged around it. By the time we get there, that person has spent years being told that their experience wasn't real." Another pause. "In this case, she had people who believed her before we did. Not always how it goes." "No," Victor said. "Isn't." The restraining order was filed at 4:17 and granted at 5:53. Joanna called Emily the moment it came through. Emily was sitting on Ruth's porch when the call came. Evening was cool. She had a cup of coffee. She had been sitting there for an hour, doing something she hadn't done since she was a teenager, nothing. Just sitting, just being present in a moment that didn't require anything of her. "Done," Joanna said. "He is legally prohibited from contacting you in any form, approaching any location where you are known to be, or attempting to locate you through any intermediary. Violation is criminal contempt." Emily looked at the horizon. "He's going to violate it," she said. "Possibly," Joanna said. Which would add criminal contempt to the existing charges, which is not in his interest. Attorney will advise him strongly against it. Attorney is going to have a lot to advise him against, Emily said. "Yes," Joanna said, "he is." After she hung up, Emily sat on the porch and let the evening happen around her. She thought about the last 4 years in the specific documentary way she'd learned to think about them, not from inside, not the way she'd lived them, but from outside, the way you look at a map of somewhere you've been and see for the first time the shape of the territory, how it had begun, the specific mechanics of how each door had closed, particular genius of it, the way you couldn't help but acknowledge the design, even as it sickened you, the isolation first, then the money, then the information control, building an architecture that looked from the outside like a relationship and felt from the inside like a room with no exits. She thought about the night the kitchen door opened. She thought about the specific sound of Victor's voice saying, "I'm not here to scare you." She thought about how long she had been waiting for someone to say that. Not that they believed her, not that they would help her. Just that first simplest thing, that the person coming through the door was not one more thing to be afraid of. She had been waiting for that for 4 years, maybe longer. She picked up the burner phone and she called Victor, picked up on the second ring. "It's done," she said. The restraining order came through. "I know," he said. Joanna called Carol. Carol called me. "Of course she did," Emily said. Pause. "Victor," she said. "Yeah, I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to say something, and I don't think there's a right way to say it, so I'm just going to say it." "All right," he said. "I had stopped believing that people could just," she stopped. "Tried again. I had a version of the world where what happened to me made sense, where people didn't notice because noticing was inconvenient, and where nobody helped because helping was complicated, and where the story Daniel told about me was the story that stuck because it was easier than the truth." She paused. You sat at the end of a counter and you noticed. That's it. That's the whole thing. You noticed and you asked and you stayed." Victor was quiet on the other end. "My father noticed things like that," Emily continued. "He'd come home and he'd just know if something was wrong. He never made a production of it. He'd just sit down and say, 'You want to tell me about it?' Like it was the most natural thing. Like noticing was just what you did." Her voice had gone a little rough at the edges. "Think I stopped expecting that from people after he died. I think I decided that was a specific quality of one specific person, and the world didn't have it generally." She stopped. "And then you walked into a kitchen," she said. Victor was quiet for a long moment. "Your father sat on the side of a highway for an hour and a half," he said finally, "talking to a stranger, keeping him still, saving his life without making it a thing. Then he went home and didn't tell anyone and didn't think it was remarkable." A pause. He raised someone who cooks for other people at midnight and calls it nothing, and cried alone for 4 years rather than burden anyone. A pause. He raised you, Emily. The noticing is in you too. You just haven't had the conditions to use it. She sat on the porch with the evening going dark around her and the coffee in her hands and her eyes burning with the good kind of tears this time. The kind that come from being seen so clearly and so completely that there is nothing left to hide. I'm going to open that restaurant, she said. I know, Victor said. 12 tables, handwritten menu, seasonal ingredients. I know, he said again. I'm going to need to start a new notebook. Ruth probably has one, Victor said. She strikes me as a woman who keeps notebooks. Emily laughed. The real kind, the kind that comes from the body. She does, Emily said. She has a whole drawer of them. Then start tonight, Victor said. She looked at the horizon. Tonight, she said. She went inside and she found Ruth in the kitchen, and she said, Do you have a notebook I can borrow? Ruth opened the second drawer to the left of the stove and pulled out a spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover, new, never touched, and handed it over without asking what it was for. Emily sat at the kitchen table. She opened to the first page. She picked up a pen. At the top of the page, she wrote 12 tables. Below that, she wrote, Menu seasonal changes weekly. Below that, she wrote name. She sat for a moment thinking. Then she wrote 2 words. She looked at them for a long time. Then she closed the notebook and held it in both hands and sat with the particular, enormous quiet of someone who has just taken the first step of a journey she had delayed for 4 years. Outside, the night was complete. Inside, the notebook was full of the only thing that had ever really been missing. Beginning. Ruth found the notebook on the kitchen table the next morning. Emily had gone to bed. The notebook was sitting there, closed, blue cover facing up, the pen laid across it. Ruth didn't open it. She wasn't that kind of person. She just moved it to the side, made coffee, had, when Emily came in 20 minutes later, still sleep-soft and quieter than usual, Ruth pointed at it without saying anything. Emily picked it up, held it for a moment, set it beside her coffee cup. Did you write in it? Ruth asked. A little, Emily said. Good, Ruth said. That was all. They had breakfast. Emily cooked, because Emily always cooked now. Ruth led her, because Ruth understood instinctively the kitchen was the place Emily reclaimed herself first, before any other room, before any other part of her life. Cooking was the thing that had always been real. Daniel had called it a little hobby and slowly taught her to call it that too. And every meal she made in Ruth's kitchen was an act of quiet reclamation she didn't have a word for yet, but felt in her hands every time she picked up a knife. 3 days after the restraining order was granted, Joanna called with an update Emily hadn't expected. He wants to negotiate, Joanna said. Emily set down her coffee. Already. His attorney contacted mine this morning. They're floating the idea of a plea arrangement on the federal charges in exchange for, and this is the part I want you to hear clearly, in exchange for a public statement from Daniel characterizing your separation as mutual and amicable. Silence stretched. He wants me to help his image, Emily said. That's what he wants, Joanna said. He wants to use the plea negotiation as leverage to get a narrative he controls. Emily stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. She stood there for a moment, looking at nothing, just feeling the specific and familiar shape of Daniel's mind at work. Even now, even with federal charges and a restraining order and his entire financial structure exposed, the first move was to try to control the story. Instinct was so deep it had outlasted everything else. No, Emily said. I thought you'd say that, Joanna said. Tell them no. Tell them Emily Carter will cooperate fully with the federal investigation and will give her complete testimony as a cooperating witness, and no part of that cooperation includes any statement that protects Daniel Brooks's reputation. That's exactly what I'll tell them, Joanna said. Joanna, Emily paused. Tell them if he contacts me or attempts to contact me through any channel, I will notify Reeves personally. Noted, Joanna said, loudly and clearly. After she hung up, Emily stood at the window for a long time. She thought about what had just happened, the fact that Daniel had reached out, that his first instinct under pressure was to reach for her, to use her, to try to fold her back into his narrative even now. She thought about how different it felt to say no from a place with a locked door that she held the key to. She went back to the kitchen table. She opened the blue notebook. She read the 2 words she had written at the bottom of the first page under 12 tables and menu seasonal, changes weekly and name. 2 words were Roberts, her father's name. On the door of a restaurant that didn't exist yet, the man who had stopped on the I-40 at mile marker 211 and stayed with a stranger and saved his life and never told anyone and went home and didn't think it was remarkable. Roberts. She picked up the pen and started writing. Not just names and floor plans, now recipes. The ones she'd been carrying in her head for years, the ones that had accumulated in the private kitchen of her imagination during 4 years of cooking in places that weren't hers. She wrote fast, the way you write when the ideas have been waiting and you've finally given them somewhere to go. She wrote for 2 hours. When she stopped, she had 11 pages. She looked at them, the handwriting slightly breathless in places, corrected in others, arrows and asterisks and margin notes that only made sense to her, and she thought, there it is. There's the thing he almost took. It's still here. It was always here. She closed the notebook. She called Victor. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting her call, which was something she was getting used to, the specific way Victor anticipated things without making a performance of it. Tried to negotiate, she said. I heard, Victor said. Of course you did. Joanna keeps Carol informed. Carol keeps me informed. You should have a talk with your legal team about confidentiality. I should, Emily said. I'm not going to. No, Victor said. You're probably not. A pause. I said no, Emily said. Good. He's going to keep trying, she said, not just legally. He's going to try to shape what people think happened. He's going to find ways to make himself the reasonable one and me the problem. Very good at that he is, Victor said. But here's the difference. What? The last time he tried to shape the narrative, you were isolated. You had no one. His version was the only one available because you had no platform, no documentation, no people. A pause. That's not your situation now. Emily thought about that. Reeves called me this morning, Victor continued. Not officially, just one person to another. What'd he say? He said the second business partner has given them 3 years of emails, 3 years of documented communications that showed Daniel knew exactly what he was doing when he was doing it, and that he specifically structured things to ensure no one else could be implicated, which, Reeves pointed out, means that the structure that protected his partners from legal liabilities simultaneously eliminates any possibility of distributing blame. A pause. He built it so tight that it's airtight against him. Ironic, Emily said. Very, Victor said. Men who try to control everything tend to create systems that reflect exactly who they are. When those systems get examined, there's nowhere to hide. Emily held the phone and thought about Daniel and the apartment, building his perfect systems, perfect furniture, perfect narrative, all of it so controlled, all of it so precise, all of it in the end a map of himself that he'd handed to the people who came looking. Victor, she said, I want to come back. A pause. To the Roadhouse? No, she said. To Arizona, to whatever comes next. Been here 10 days, and I'm grateful. I'm more grateful than I know how to say, but I need to start moving. I need to start building. I can feel myself getting ready to. And if I stay still much longer, She stopped. I need to move. I know, Victor said. I've been waiting for you to say that. Course you have. There's an apartment, he said. Tucson. It belongs to a woman in the chapter's extended family. She's been in Phoenix for 6 months. She's not coming back until spring. It's empty and it's in your name. Not Daniel's name, not a shared name. Your name on a lease that he has no access to and no knowledge of. Emily was quiet. How long have you had that arranged, she said. Since the week after the kitchen, Victor said. She pressed her lips together. 10 days. She'd been at Ruth's for 10 days thinking about what came next, and Victor had had the next thing arranged since 11 days after she'd first spoken to him. Not presuming, not rushing her, just having it ready for when she was. She stopped. That's a lot. It's a furnished apartment, Victor said. It's not a lot. It's a room with a bed and a kitchen where you can start the notebook properly. She almost laughed. The notebook, she said. How many pages? 11. Good start, he said. When do you want to go? She looked at the blue notebook on the table, at Ruth's kitchen, where she had cooked her way back to something like herself over 10 quiet days. She thought about what she needed to say to Ruth before she left the specific and entirely insufficient Thank you. That was all she had to offer someone who had opened a door at midnight and made eggs and not asked a single question. 2 days, she said. I'll have Frank ready, Victor said. She almost said, you don't have to do that, but stopped herself. She was learning slowly, imperfectly, against the deep grain of 4 years of being taught not to accept things to receive help without immediately trying to return it, or refuse it, or minimize it. Harder than it sounded. It was one of the things she worked on every day, alongside the notebook and the cooking and the long, nonlinear process of learning what she was like when she wasn't afraid. Thank you, she said instead. 2 days, Victor said. Hung up. She turned to find Ruth standing in the doorway. Leaving? Ruth said. In 2 days, Emily said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Ruth said. Ready is ready. Staying past ready doesn't help anyone. She came into the kitchen and poured herself coffee. Eggs you made this morning were the best thing I've eaten in 3 years. I want that on record. Emily looked at her. At this woman who had opened a door at midnight for a stranger, who had known exactly what to do and what not to do, who had given Emily a kitchen and a quilt and a drawer full of notebooks and the particular mercy of treating her like a guest instead of a victim. I'm going to put you on the menu, Emily said. Ruth raised an eyebrow. When I open the restaurant, Emily said, there's going to be a dish on the menu and it's going to be named after you, and you're never going to be told what it is in advance. You'll just come in someday and see it there. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. I'll hold you to that, she said. Good, Emily said. Frank came in a blue pickup, same truck 2 mornings later. Ruth stood at the door and Emily hugged her properly. The full kind, the kind that means something, and Ruth patted her back once, twice, said into her shoulder, go build the thing. Emily got into the truck. She didn't look back, not because she wasn't grateful, because looking forward was a skill she was practicing, and it required the same kind of daily intention as everything else she was rebuilding. You don't learn to look forward by instinct. You learn it by choosing it over and over in every moment that offers you the choice. Tucson apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that was old enough to have character without being old enough to be a problem. The woman who owned it had left it furnished in the specific way of someone who knows their own taste and doesn't apologize for it. Warm colors, books on every available surface, a kitchen that had been used seriously and showed it. Emily walked through it the first time and felt something she hadn't felt about a physical space in 4 years. She felt like she could breathe in it. She put the blue notebook on the kitchen counter. She put her bag in the bedroom. She opened the window in the living room and let the October air in, the particular dry warmth of Arizona autumn, and she stood there for a moment with her eyes closed. Then she started a list, not in the notebook on a separate page, because the notebook was for the restaurant and this list was for survival. What she needed, where to get it, how to start. She had called Joanna that morning, and Joanna had walked her through the financial picture, the emergency funds that Carol had quietly arranged access to through the chapter's network, the legal mechanisms through which Emily would eventually be entitled to a portion of the assets Daniel had accumulated using financial structures she was now documenting for federal investigators. It wasn't fast, it wasn't going to be easy, but it was real, and it was moving, and she had people who knew how to navigate it. She was not starting from nothing. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She had thought for so long that escape meant starting from nothing. That getting out meant losing everything, not just the bad things, but everything, including herself. Daniel had been very careful to ensure she understood it that way. That leaving meant destitution and isolation, and the specific humiliating experience of having no one believe her. She was discovering instead was that she had things he hadn't known about, because they existed in places he couldn't see or measure. She had skills, cooking, management, the deep operational knowledge of how a restaurant actually works from the inside. She had a name written on the first page of a blue notebook for a restaurant with 12 tables and a seasonal menu. She had 11 pages of recipes. She had Carol and Joanna and Marcus and Ruth and Frank and Victor. She had the debt her father had created on the side of an Arizona highway 21 years ago, being paid forward in the most unexpected and comprehensive way possible. She was not starting from nothing. She was starting from herself. The federal case against Daniel Brooks moved faster than anyone expected. Joanna called 3 weeks after Emily settled into the Tucson apartment with news that recalibrated everything. Fourth victim has come forward, Joanna said. A former employee. She has documentation going back 8 years. And she has something none of the others have. What? Emily said. She has recordings, Joanna said. She recorded 3 meetings legally in a one-party consent state. The recording showed Daniel explicitly directing the shell company transfers and explicitly discussing the strategy for ensuring that any investigation would be unable to trace funds back to him. A pause. Emily, the recordings also include a conversation about you specifically. Emily went still. What kind of conversation? He told this employee, and this is documented now on record, that you were a useful structural element and that maintaining your financial dependence was necessary for preserving the organizational simplicity of his personal accounts. The words landed with a specific weight. A useful structural element, not a person, not a fiancé, not someone he loved or claimed to love. Structural element, a component of the system, a piece of the architecture. He said that, Emily said. On a recording that is now in the possession of the FBI, Joanna said, Emily sat in the apartment with the October light coming through the window, and she held the phone and she felt something happen inside her that she didn't have a precise word for. Not rage, though rage was in it. Not vindication, though vindication was in it too. Something larger than both of those. Something that was specifically the feeling of hearing the truth stated plainly in a context where its plainness was itself the exposure. He had never loved her. She had known this in the way you know things you can't afford to fully know. She had told herself stories, the way everyone tells themselves stories. She had held on to the beginning, the intensity, the attention, the feeling of being chosen, and had put that against the years followed and had tried to make them cohere, tried to find a version of events in which both things were true. They were not both true. The beginning had been architecture too. Charm, the attention, the making her feel like the only person in the room, all of it structural, all of it the front end of the system, a useful structural element. She breathed through it. Emily, Joanna said carefully. I'm here, Emily said. I know that was hard to hear. Was, Emily said. It was also the clearest thing anyone has said to me about any of this. She paused. There's something almost when you've been told for years that you're imagining things, that you're too sensitive, that your experience isn't real, and then someone produces a recording where the person who told you all of that says, in his own voice, exactly what the architecture was. She stopped. The clearest thing anyone has said. His attorney called again this morning, Joanna said. They're not floating narrative control anymore. They're asking about a plea, a real one. Federal guidelines, 3 to 5 on the primary counts, depending on what the prosecutors decide to pursue. Financial restitution, civil liability to the business partners. Domestic component adds a separate track. Reeves is working with the county DA on state charges for the pattern of coercive control. Arizona law has become more specific on that in recent years. How long until it's resolved? Months, Joanna said. These things take months, but the direction is clear. He has nowhere to go with this, Emily. The recordings closed every remaining avenue. Emily exhaled. What do I need to do? Keep cooperating. Keep documenting. And Joanna paused. Keep building whatever you're building. Reeves asked about you last week. He wanted to know how you were doing. Told him you were building something. He seemed pleased by that. Tell him thank you, Emily said. I will, Joanna said. She hung up. Emily sat for a long time with the apartment quiet around her. Then she got up, went to the kitchen counter, opened the blue notebook, turned to page 12. She wrote for the next 3 hours without stopping. Tucson's restaurant scene, it turned out, had exactly the kind of gap that Emily's notebook had been written to fill. She found this out not through any formal market research, but through the specific intelligence of someone who has spent years working in food service and knows instinctively what exists and what doesn't. Tucson had history, a food culture that went back deep and drew from multiple traditions and had developed a specific regional identity that Emily found genuinely compelling. Saturday market she dreamed about in her notebook, the one with the seasonal produce that changed with what was actually growing, that reflected where you were in the year. What it didn't have in the neighborhood she was looking at was a 12-table restaurant with a handwritten menu that changed every week. She called Victor on a Tuesday evening, 2 months after moving to Tucson. Found a space, she said. Victor was quiet for a moment. Tell me about it, he said. She told him. Small building, former breakfast place that had closed during the pandemic and never reopened. A kitchen that had been maintained by the landlord and needed updating but had good bones. The rent was manageable, not comfortable, but manageable. And the landlord, a woman named Grace, who had grown up in Tucson and was deeply invested in the neighborhood's food culture, responded to Emily's pitch with an interest that felt genuine and not merely transactional. Told her what I wanted to do, Emily said. The seasonal menu, the small scale, the handwritten format. She asked me what my background was. I told her about the Roadhouse, about what I'd been doing there, about the food. A pause. I didn't tell her the other part. She didn't need that. What did she say? Victor asked. She said she'd been waiting for someone to do something real with that space for 3 years, Emily said. Then she offered me a 6-month trial lease at below market while I got started. Victor was quiet. Victor, Emily said, I need to ask you something. Ask, he said, the chapter, she said. The legal contacts, the safe house, the apartment, Frank in the truck, all of it. That's not something you do for everyone. That's a significant. Emily, he said. I need to understand, she said. Need to know what this is. Not because I'm not grateful, I don't have words for how grateful I am, but because I need to know how to carry it. What it means. Whether your father saved my life, Victor said. I know, Emily said. But that's one person to one person. This was an organization. This was people I'd never met doing things that cost real time and real resources. Do you know what I did the week I got out of the hospital? Victor said. She waited. After the I-40 accident, he said. After the surgery, after the rehab, after they told me I was going to walk fine and I didn't have to think about what almost happened. Tried to find him. Your father. I spent 2 weeks trying to find the man who stopped. Never could. The paramedics didn't get his name. The highway patrol report just said Good Samaritan departed scene before officers arrived. A pause. I wanted to find him for 20 years. I thought about him every time I drove that stretch of highway. Thought about him every time someone asked me how I was still in one piece. Another pause. When you told me his name, and I understood who you were, what you were in the middle of, I didn't make a decision. There was nothing to decide. This was always going to happen. Just didn't know what it was going to look like. Emily pressed her hand flat on the kitchen counter. He would have said it was nothing, she said. I know, Victor said. That's why it wasn't nothing. She stood in her kitchen, in her apartment in the city where she was going to open a restaurant, and she felt the full weight of the line that ran from her father on the side of an Arizona highway to this moment. The invisible 20-year thread of a good act that had never asked for anything and had not known what it would produce and had produced this. I'm going to name it Roberts, she said. The restaurant. Victor was quiet. He'd hate that, Victor said. I know, Emily said. That's why I'm doing it. The sound that came from Victor Hale then was something his chapter members would have found astonishing. Something that very few people in his life had heard. A laugh. Genuine, guarded, surprised laugh, the kind that gets out before you can decide whether to let it. He would absolutely hate that, Victor said. Good, Emily said. Roberts opened on a Thursday in March, 9 months after a biker boss had pushed open a kitchen door and asked a question nobody else had the courage to ask. 12 tables, handwritten menu on a chalkboard that Emily changed every week based on what was at the Saturday market. Kitchen that smelled like the particular combination of things Emily Carter had been accumulating in her imagination for 4 years. Small sign above the door would, simple, hand-lettered that said Roberts, and below it, smaller, seasonal kitchen. The night before the opening, Emily was in the kitchen alone, prepping. Opening was small invitation only, friends, and the people who had made it possible, because Emily was not ready for a public opening yet and knew it. Grace of knowing what she wasn't ready for was one of the things she was learning. She heard the front door open. She came out of the kitchen. Victor stood in the middle of her 12-table dining room, looking at it. The tables each slightly different, sourced from 3 different places, and the chalkboard menu, and the small details she'd accumulated over months of planning. He was still for a moment. Then he looked at her. 12 tables, he said. 12 tables, she confirmed. He walked slowly to the chalkboard. Read the menu for the following evening. Top to bottom, the careful handwriting that had evolved from the breathless notebook pages to something more settled, more sure of itself. He turned around. Your father would have ordered everything on this menu, he said. He would have asked to meet the chef, Emily said, then been embarrassed when it was me. And then told everyone he knew, Victor said, and then told everyone he knew, she agreed. They stood in her restaurant for a moment. 12 tables, the handwritten menu, the seasonal kitchen, the name on the door. Thank you, Emily said. You built it, Victor said. You asked the question, she said. He looked at her. Say it, she said. The thing you always say, he almost smiled. We didn't save you, he said. We just reminded you, she continued. You were worth saving, he finished. She looked around her restaurant, tables and the menu and the kitchen behind her that was hers to cook in, finally, the way she had always known she was supposed to cook. Door with her father's name on it. At the life she had rebuilt from a kitchen floor and a bar receipt and a question asked by someone who was actually paying attention. The opening night was everything and nothing like she'd planned, which was exactly how openings should be. Carol came. Emily had never met her in person until that evening and was startled to find she was shorter than her voice suggested, with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant something. Joanna came with her husband. Marcus Webb came and said very little and ate everything and left a note on the table that said outstanding forensics on the food, which was the most Marcus Webb thing anyone could possibly do and which made Emily laugh for a long time after he'd gone. Reeves came. That surprised her. He called Joanna to ask if it was appropriate, which Joanna had relayed to Emily, who had called him directly. Come, she'd said. You're the reason he's not out there trying to find me. The recordings are the reason, Reeves had said. Come anyway, Emily said. He came. He ordered 3 things. He complimented the sourcing. On his way out, he stopped at the kitchen door and said, the case went to plea last week. 3 counts, federal. 5 years minimum, financial restitution, lifetime prohibition from financial management roles. DA filed state charges yesterday. The pattern of coercive control count was added. He paused. I wanted you to hear it from me. Emily stood in her kitchen doorway. Done? She asked. The legal part is done, he said. The rest of it takes longer. But the legal part is done. She nodded. Thank you, she said. Thank you for cooperating, he said. You made a hard case airtight. After he left, Emily went back to her kitchen. The last table was finishing. The evening was winding down. She could hear the sound of Victor's chapter at the largest table, 8 of them, taking up the corner, laughing at something she hadn't caught, comfortable and loud and entirely themselves, the way they always were. She went back out. She sat with them, not as the waitress, not as the girl who brought coffee, as the person at the center of the table, the reason they were there, the host of this room that had her father's name on the door. Frank was there, the quiet driver in the blue truck, who turned out to have opinions about food that were both extensive and specific. Told her for 7 minutes about the best pozole he'd ever eaten and why hers was in the same conversation. High praise, Carol said to Emily quietly. Apparently, Emily said, later, after everyone had gone and the restaurant was empty, and she was doing the particular meditative work of a kitchen after service, cleaning and putting away and setting up for tomorrow, she found something on table 7, table closest to the window. She hadn't seen anyone leave it. It was the bar receipt, the one from the Roadhouse, the one Victor had written Carol's number on the night he'd sat in her kitchen and listened to her talk about 12 tables and a seasonal menu, creased from being folded and end-folded. Again, the ink slightly worn, but the numbers still legible. She picked it up. She turned it over. The back, in Victor's handwriting, was a single line, now you're worth saving twice. She stood at table 7 in her empty restaurant, and she held the bar receipt in both hands, and she thought about a young woman who had stood at a kitchen sink, learning to cry without making any sound. She thought about 4 years of pressed flat hands and mapped exits and faucets running to cover voices. She thought about what it means to disappear so thoroughly inside a life that you stop being able to imagine a different one. She thought about the moment the door opened. Just the door opening. Someone on the other side of it who was paying attention. She folded the receipt carefully and put it in the pocket of her chef's coat. She finished the close. She turned off the kitchen lights. She checked the lock, not because she was afraid, but because it was hers to lock the door of her own place, the last thing she did at the end of every night in the restaurant with her father's name on it. She stepped outside. The night was cool and clear and entirely Arizona, the particular dark of a state that still has enough space between things to let the sky be what it is. She stood for a moment. She had carried fear for so long that its absence was still something she noticed, still something she paused to register, still something that surprised her, the way a sound surprises you when it stops the sudden awareness of quiet where noise used to be. She was not afraid. She was tired in the good way, the way you are after a night of real work that went well. She was thinking about Saturday's market and the menu she'd write on Sunday and the dish she was going to name after Ruth that she hadn't told Ruth about yet. She was thinking about her notebook, the blue one, nearly full, with a second one ready on the kitchen counter at home. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about a stretch of I-40 and a man who stopped, stayed, said nothing remarkable, and went home. She thought about the invisible thread that runs from one good act to the next. The way it doesn't announce itself, the way it doesn't keep records, the way it just exists, accumulating quietly until one night it reaches exactly the person who needs it most at exactly the moment they need it. She put her hand against the door of Robert's one more time. The wood was warm from the evening inside. She took her hand away. She walked, not away from something, towards something. For the first time in a very long time, she was walking towards something. She knew exactly what it was, and it had 12 tables and a handwritten menu and her father's name on the door and a kitchen that smelled like her. It was going to be there tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. She had been afraid for 4 years. She was not afraid anymore. And that was the truest thing that had ever been said about Emily Carter, not what had been done to her, not what she had survived, not what others had done on her behalf, but this, that she had come through it and she was not afraid anymore. She was walking towards something, and it was hers, all of it, completely and irrevocably, and at last hers.